Now on this video, I wanted to show how to make a simple gasket. This is part of our ongoing series of little projects that we're working on that I call the Evil Twin Project. So in the course of cleaning this motorcycle, the last 4 or 5 times that I've done a thorough cleaning, I've noticed the oil pan gasket on this, which is now coming up on 38 years old, 37 years old, has a little bit of a drool issue, and I want to try to correct that today. Now, making an oil pan gasket, relatively straightforward. I thought I'd show how I would do it on the video and why I do it, rather than buy a commercially available gasket that might now be over 30 years old, maybe over 35 years old. And here's one lesson I've learned with older motorcycles, all of these historic bikes that are now, well, this one's 40 years old. Now, I replaced several of the gaskets on this bike, including this side cover gasket. And I've had to do it several times before I could get it to stop leaking, because the gaskets I was buying at the time, they were so old and so hard, no matter how tight you made the bolts, they still dripped and drooled. Now for me, the solution was, and that's what I'm going to share on this video, I just used gasket material that's not 35 or 40 years old. It really stacks the deck in your favor that you'll get it right. But making a gasket can be tricky, and I'll show how I do it. And what's nice when you have a modern bike, 8-10 years old, you just go down to the dealer, you pay 10 bucks or whatever you do, and you get a gasket. Well, that's not how it works with older bikes, where it's difficult to buy the parts. Because the thing is, even when you can buy the parts, you don't know when they were made. There's no date stamp on it. It's like buying a banana that's a year old. But because I'm very fussy and meticulous about cleaning a bike, I always look for little places where the oil is dripping and drooling out and try to get it before the bike becomes an oil sponge. All right, and so here are the 2 Evil Twin Suzukis. And what's very fortunate for us is, by having a spare bike, it means we also have a spare oil pan. And the oil pan comes off with, I don't know, 6 or 8 or 10 screws. And I'm going to go make a gasket. Now, it sounds like it might be overkill to say this, but it really isn't. Of all the gaskets I've changed, I've learned a couple of good basic rules. Number one, I have a tub, which I keep out in the tundra. And what happens when somebody else in the A-team or whatever is doing a gasket? Well, we just give them the tub. When you're done, bring it back. So that makes that pretty easy. Now, what I wanted to show, and this was really something I learned the hard way about gasket material. Gasket material is not all the same. It just turns out, and I just got a new roll recently. This is from AutoZone. I'll get a copy of this. It's Felpro, and it's made for gaskets that are coming in contact with oil. They have different material for different things. I've tried many times using this, the black, the gold, the silver, the gasket material. I'm just old school. It's just me. Now, I'm very conscious of something that a lot of people, maybe younger people, aren't. As things get old, they're not the same as when they were new. Ask anybody that's old. They'll tell you, it ain't the same. It looks the same, but it's not the same. But anyway, so my first point was I had a roll of this material for making RD gaskets. But this is 2 or 3 or 4 years old. So for $5, I can be a big spender and get a new roll. Now, some other information about gaskets. Just recently we polished up the Evil Twin, did a valve adjustment on it. Look at what happens to a gasket that's typically 35 years old. It takes a good beating. So that's just one of many. I saved these just for my own reference. Another thing that's really handy, these little, they're usually the carburetor gaskets. When you have a leaky carburetor, it's very difficult to make a precision gasket like this. It really has to be super accurate. Not impossible, but it's always good to have patterns. The other thing I like to have, and I just want to show this, several different sizes of, this is from my days of being a modeler, but you can buy this in any hobby shop, and it's key to making nice gaskets. The different diameters, you run this, and I'll show how I run it on a grindstone, or you can sand a razor edge, and when that's sharp, if you pick the tube up upside down and press on it, you'll have a trip to the hospital. But anyway, again, I never had good luck with this. I know other people that have had luck. Yes, and I wanted to include pretty much what I know about gasketing, which may not be as much as I think it is. These are another thing, these rubber gaskets that go on an RD exhaust system. What happens, they seem to dry out in time. They don't, and of course the rubber from the Suzuki is like a rock. So, and there's various materials that from time to time you need to use or can use. But again, these are the hardest ones to make when you go to make one of these. The one we're going to make today, relatively easy. But if you do go to make any gasket, I want to emphasize this, no matter what gasket it is, no matter what gasket you have to make, should make. There's always the people that use the old gasket. Sometimes that works. Then there's the people that use the old gasket material that, you know, it's 5 years old. Yeah, and sometimes that works. But when it doesn't, you've just doubled your work for nothing. So what I learned, and that's the trick I want to pass on. This is from AutoZone, about $5-6. And it says suggested gasket application, timing cover, fuel pump, differential. In other words, it can come in contact with oil, which is what we want to use it for. Now, as our evil twin is progressing along here, our project, I had a great way of saving some time and energy. Because I have the exhaust system already off the donor bike, I said, ooh, this will make this real easy. I have a perfect opportunity to get the oil pan off of that bike, clean it all up, and of course I've spent a little time off camera here because this is about gasketing. I can use this as one of my patterns, one of my tools to make the gasket. But the key part here is, now what's going to happen when I do the swap I'm going to have of the gasket, the day I take the first bike apart, I'm going to have to take, the first part of the job I should say, I'm going to pull off the exhaust system, take off the oil pan. Then I'm going to have to stop and make a gasket. Well, I thought, of course I have this oil pan already off the motorcycle, I can have the gasket already made, so when that day comes, I can take the exhaust system off, replace the gasket, and also while it's apart, Suzuki recommends inside here, if you've ever taken a GS apart, there's an oil screen that should be cleaned every, you can guess how many miles, but on my bike, it's going to be dirty when I take it apart, and for sure, in this pan, there's always the sludge, especially if you let the bike sit over the winter, but the stuff that's in here, you get sick when you see it, when you take a bike apart the first time. So the whole objective here of making the gasket up just a little bit ahead of time is the day we do the gasket replacement, we don't have to make the gasket and replace it on the same day. That's just a little bit of an efficiency thing I'm trying to do. Again, these tubes are available in any hobby shop at all. They're called K&S tubing. If you can't buy it, you can buy it from any hobby supplier online. Now there's 2 steps to turning this brass tube into a razor blade. That's step 1. That'll already cut you, but there's a way you got to get a knife inside, and I want to show that in a close-up. Now let me just show this as a close-up. Again, this is, I don't have a, here it is right here. K&S tubing. It telescopes so you basically can get every diameter in the world. And here's the whole trick in a nutshell. That little piece that's going to come out is going to turn this into a perfect razor blade. You just run the blade. Now you've got that angle and you've got the inner angle. This now is a razor blade hole cutter. So here we have our normal workbench, which is padded. I want to have some backdrop, or if I didn't have this, I could use a solid hardwood table, but I can't if I'm cutting with a razor blade on a hardwood table, or even on this soft, this is floor underlayment, a piece of scrap I just happen to have, it's going to be a problem. So I always like to check, get a piece of scrap material. I know this is really sharp, and I always on the other end that I'm not using, just so I don't forget and stick my hand on that. And what I want to do, I just want to whoop. I wanted to show how nice that cuts a hole. Now you have the piece in there, of course, and you can get the knife and take it out or whatever, or just keep pushing it in. But that's my little practice thing of cutting a hole. A brand new package of material. Now there's always a trick to everything to make it a little bit easier. This material usually has quite a curl in it. I want to back it up. A lot of times you can use a little heat on it, a hair dryer, get it to lay down flat, or like rolling up a rug, you can just roll it up backwards. But I want to get it to lay flat, number one. It's got to lay flat or you're not going to get an accurate cut. Of course, there's a million, see, the thing is, there's a million ways to do this. I'm only trying to zero in on what's the easiest way for me. Now, I can take this, it'll be very easy. That's going to lay flat. Now, I always like to just hit a little bit of the heat from the heat gun, just to get it to lay down as flat as possible. That might be an optional step, but anything you can do to get this to lay down flat just makes it a little easier, a little more accurate. Oh, what's a handy way is just put some weight on that, or have somebody hold it and use the part itself to spot the holes. And once all the holes are spotted, and I want to make sure I've got this, nothing's moved, I can trace the outside of this with a Sharpie marker. And this side, of course, can just hang out just a little bit. But the most important thing to do whenever you make a gasket, get the holes in first and make sure all the bolts go through the holes, so that you don't wind up you don't want to at the last minute have to stretch the gasket to get over there. That's not really a good way to do it. Now I can use the old gasket, and by the way, this is what happens to 35-year-old gaskets. They get brittle. I can line this up. And in the worst of all worlds, and if you really, I'm just showing this is something I think is overkill, but you can take some ordinary masking tape, and just knowing that this material that we have, if I knew for sure you could buy this gasket and it would be brand new material, but you don't know. And especially if you try to get it from somebody online, good luck with that. And I bought, this is really not funny, I bought some RD gaskets from, I forget the name of the place, and I really shouldn't say it on video anyway. And when they came, they were so brittle. Anyway, from this point on, we just need some sharp razor blades, some number 11 blades. The most important thing to pick up out of the whole thing, and these little oil reliefs here. And when we actually do this job, now we're about an hour ahead of doing this. And what's really wonderful about this, on the day that I'm going to do this, it may be a day in a tundra, I don't know. But anytime I can make some efficiency, and the efficiency comes from, for instance, once you take the exhaust system off the bike, especially on this bike, but it's not a big job to drop the sump, clean the oil screen, which always has something in it, unless you don't ride the bike. And when we actually do the job of dumping this oil pan, you will not believe what's in your oil pan after 44,000 miles. Now I can just connect these. This is a kind of a simple thing. Get out some new razor blades, number 11 blades, whatever you happen to have in stock. But it's the key part is getting the holes that they line up. In fact, if you really want to be cute about it, you can take the bolts, put all the bolts in from the back, make sure they all line up. And this is one of those things that just to double check that I have all nothing that needs to be addressed here. All the bolts will have lined up just perfectly. And since I use the cover itself to punch out all those holes, you think that probably stacked the deck in my favor a little bit. But if any of them were wrong, before we go any further, cutting out the gasket. Yep, and I said the number one rule of gasket making, simple as it is, you got to cut the holes first. Cutting the holes first and making sure the bolts go in, from that point on, it's a piece of cake, literally. Now another thing, and just to mention it, these self-healing pads are available again at any hobby shop or online. They're self-healing pads. And what that means is you put a cut in it with a razor or with a tool like this, and within time that pad just gels back. It's called a self-healing pad. And it doesn't destroy your razors or your tools. Now, I wanted to mention, even though we have a number 11 blade, you could go around and cut these shapes. It's always nice, I always think it is anyway, if you can really get and take advantage of the fact that these tubes are so useful. And let me just show this really quickly. These tubes are really pretty cool. Now, by having those two, all I need to do, and I bet this is a dull hand, this is not going to be as good as I want it to be, but it allows me to make that shape. And the main thing with this is we know this material is nice and pliable. It's fresh. It's just like, and years ago when I was building model planes, buying fresh glue from Brodak because they sell so much of it. It's like buying fresh bananas. You don't buy bananas online from a guy that's has them in stock for a year. Same thing with the gasket material. I want fresh gasket material. I have learned that lesson the hard way. Now at this point, you could take a razor, or on the outside you could even use sharp scissors. But here's another use for these little tubes, and we have them in all various diameters. When you want to make a nice inside cut, it's a real easy thing to do. And if I put one of those in every corner, I just need to connect the dots, and I have nice clean cut radiuses in every corner. That's a really nice trick. A nice way to make a more nicer, neater gasket, whatever. I know, because some people may not have ever been exposed to what this is. This is an X-Acto knife with a number 11 blade. It's a very pointy, very sharp blade. This one has the tip broken off. It's not brand new. But again, this is a very useful tool for doing things like this. Hobbyists would have a dozen of these in their toolbox. But this is even a more useful tool. Every time I use this and I want to go around all the corners here, I want to make the corners, and I'm just going to connect them with that X-Acto blade. Now basically, with all the outer diameter holes punched, relatively simple job now. I call it connect the dots, but this makes for a really, really nice, neat job. And we better get a new blade. It's funny how these blades are good, but sometimes you have to go back over it to get a nice clean cut. And that's pretty much just a question of trimming the rest of these edges, and we're going to have us a gasket. So this really worked to my advantage today. Now I wanted to just share another tip, and Luciano was the one shared this tip with me, and I want to, while at the same time I'm thanking Luciano, thank everybody that shares information on YouTube. I am so appreciative of it. And it saved me time and energy and money and whatever. Made me a better man. There was a lot of room for improvement. But anyway, the whole point. There's another tip. And the tip is, when you're going to put a part back like this, and when I put the one that, this is the spare one, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take wheel bearing grease, just put a light coating on it and a light coating on the gasket, so that I'm sandwiching in with grease. And what that does, it allows the gasket to come off like the old gasket. I don't have it here right now, but the old gasket just came right off. And if you've ever gone back, now I remember going back to the days of 55 Chevys, when you take the valve cover gasket off and you take a paint scraper and you'd be there for 2 hours to get the old gasket off, and they use that black Permatex, and it still leaked. But that's a good tip, and thank you, Luciano, and thank you everybody that shares on YouTube. Now, just one other tip, and I wanted to share this too. And this is the kind of stuff you learn the hard way. I had at one time, and I don't even remember which bike it was, but I had somewhere on the engine, it was just, at the end of every ride, it would be like you took a little Windex bottle and sprayed some oil in. It got me so annoyed. So what I did, I tightened the bolts. I thought, that's great. Went for another ride, 100 miles later, more oil. Went and tightened the bolts some more. Eventually stripped one of the bolts, and I had to get a Healy coil, and so what happens, and I wanted to share this, this old gasket material, as you can see, is garbage. This one in particular is that 35 years old. Because they might have made these gaskets 3 years before they put the bike together. And I know, I found out, I was at Circle Cycle, and Pete said Suzuki's replaced this gasket with a new part number, so maybe those are better. But you know what? I always like having control of my stuff I'm doing, because I put a lot of passion into this, and I don't want to be dependent on this part here just dripping and drooling oil, and it would always wind up on the muffler, and then you got to clean the muffler. And the gasket took me less than an hour to make. And maybe the job to do it is going to be an hour. I don't know if I can get my pet octopus over here to help me put the exhaust on, but that's a project for another day. Another real small tip. I try to always leave the parts that I have in the little bags. If you buy parts from Yamaha or whatever, I like to always have, look at this, got Luciano Felici's name on it. This might be a collector item. I always like to have them in the original part bag. Now, it's for my own information, because sometimes I need two, and these are the ones, I think these are for an RD, I'm not even sure, but the point is, then you have access to the part number. The part number is not on the part, but if you have this and you need another one, at least you have a chance of ordering it. Or if you have the original one, you can use it, which I just did, as a pattern. One more step on our very evil twins project. Every day that I get one more part done on this, I add it to the clean table, and I'm so happy. This has been a great project. I'm looking forward to seeing it complete not far into the future. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.